Yes? Welcome to the last session of the last day of the conference.
There's a closing session.
Oh, except for the closing session, yes. Yes, your persistence is most impressive. Thank you very much. My name is Mark Cummings. I'm the editor and publisher at Choice. And we're here to talk this morning about research data management and why it isn't particularly easy. Actually, I'm not going to be doing the talking. The talking is going to be done by these august panelists. Carol Tenopir, the Chancellor's Professor and Board of Visitors Professor at the University of Tennessee. Jordan Kaufman, the Research Associate at the Center for Information and Communication Studies at UT. And Robert Sandusky, who is Associate Professor and Associate Dean at the University of Illinois at Chicago, pardon me. Not presenting, but author of the resulting white paper, is Danielle Pollack, an Associate Professor at Simmons University. Yep. And you can absorb these names. Okay. So, back in 2012, ACRL, which is the parent institution of Choice, conducted a survey of US and Canadian academic libraries. And it was designed to see what research data services they were offering to their patrons. And they asked questions about the types of services that were offered, the staffing that was required, the training for that staff, and I think most importantly, what their plans were for the future. And those results were summarized in a white paper written by Professor Tenopir, Ben Birch, and Susie Allard that was published back in 2012. One of the findings of this survey was that only about 15% of the respondents were actually offering any kind of systematic or systematized RDS or research data management services in their library, but that over a third of them planned to do so within the next 2 years. Well, that's 7 years ago, and a lot has happened since then. Obviously, there are new technologies and tools, and certainly our attitude toward data and data management has changed a great deal, particularly around issues of access, accessibility, and privacy. So it seems appropriate that we go back and see what progress has been made against the intentions of libraries back in 2012 to offer such services. And so in the spring of this year, Choice approached Professor Tenopir here and asked her if she would, using her 2012 white paper as a baseline, essentially conduct an informal longitudinal study to see the state of RDS in academic libraries in North America, and to see if the kinds of goals that were outlined in 2012 had been met, and if not, why not? So the presenters on this panel today, and by the way, we'll get back to this in a moment, but their results are going to be summarized in a white paper that will be published by Choice in early December called Research Data Services, Where Are We Today? And this summarizes the points here. Basically, we conducted a survey. They wrote the survey, and we deployed it to the same institutions as before. We did not get the identical responses or identical institutions, of course. So it's not truly a formal longitudinal study, but the results are very significant. And the authors of the paper that came out of this survey are here today, and they're going to be talking about their findings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carol.
Thank you, Mark. And as Mark mentioned, the intent was really to compare. Where are we today compared to 2012? There were lots of plans, not a lot of activity in most academic libraries in 2012, but lots of plans. We wanted to see where that came. Choice sent an email with an invitation to their mailing list of North American academic libraries this summer. After several encouragement reminders, I won't say nagging, we finally closed in September. In hindsight, perhaps it wasn't such a great idea to send it in the summer, I don't know, or maybe academic library directors get too many requests for surveys, but we closed with about 6% response rate. We decided that we needed to close, we weren't going to get any more. So what we're talking about today is 186 responses. I do need to make it clear that these are all types of academic libraries in Canada and the US. So these include, associate degree up to ARL libraries. Most of the surveys you see of research data services are of research libraries, ARL libraries. So if the numbers look different, that's part of the reason that these are all types of academic institutions. And the unit of analysis is the library. We ask the director or the senior administrator to reply on behalf of what the library is doing. So it's not the opinions of the individual, it's what the library is actually doing or planning to do. So because that response rate was kind of low, we decided we needed to look at a little bit more depth of who our respondents were, and compare that. In the paper, we compare that to the population of the whole, those 3,000 Carnegie libraries. So 32% of our respondents that we're talking about today are in doctoral granting institutions. That's in Carnegie speak, that's R1, R2, R3. So they're more research focused than the others. This compares to only 14% of Carnegie institutions. So we are heavier on the doctoral granting institutions than our respondents. I think the main outcome of that would be that we probably paint a more optimistic picture of research data services, overestimate of libraries that are providing research data services because we have a higher percent of doctoral granting institutions. But we have respondents from a variety of types of institutions. And in the full paper, we'll break down all the results by type of institution, but we don't have time to do that today. Just because they're more research institutions doesn't mean these are gigantic institutions that are represented by these libraries. So 60% of them have under 5,000 students. So they're not huge institutions, but it goes all the way down to the really big institutions as well. But we have a good cross section in terms of sizes of institutions represented by the libraries that responded. So this is really a colorful mess, but let me take a few more minutes to explain this. So we gave people a whole long list of types of research services. We didn't want to just say, are you offering research data services, yes or no? Because you know that there's a whole range of kinds of things. You can be involved with research data and offer something quite different from your neighboring library that's involved in research data. So we did a whole long list of research data services. Maybe that's why our response rate was low. But we took those types of services, and after the fact, we categorized them into a couple categories. And these are what I'm calling informational services. That is, services that are an extension of traditional library reference services. So that information. And you can see the colors here. So the orange is they're offering now. This is 2019, offering now in percentages. The blue is they have plans to offer in the near-term future. And then the purple is they are not offering and have no plans to offer. So what you can see is reference support and creating web guides are the most popular kinds of services. Again, extension of traditional services. Helping faculty and students locate research data or help them locate information about research data, where to deposit it, how to deposit it, research plans, et cetera. Helping people find information about research data. Those are by far the most commonly offered services. The others, a majority, are not offering. other kinds of services, including discussing our research data services with others on campus, or doing data management plan consulting, helping with metadata standards, training coworkers in preparing research data, involved in data policies on campus, or outreach and collaboration with others internally or externally. Just a few of these are offered, and you will not be surprised to find out that those few are skewed toward the research institutions, more likely to offer than other kinds of them. The picture is even less involved in research data services when we look at what we've post-categorized as technical or hands-on support. These are services that take more time, perhaps, or extension of technical repository kind of services. So technical support for a data repository, directly participating with researchers on campus to help in their data life cycle, helping them create and manage their data, directly preparing data for deposit in a repository, cross-campus identifying data sets that could then be ingested into a repository, actually creating the metadata for researchers, and then the last is deaccessioning, or taking data out of a repository. Okay. I joked in 2012 people weren't taking data out because they hadn't put enough in. I can make the same joke in 2019 that maybe we're still at the point of trying to get data in rather than take data out. But again, as you can see, the orange are those that are offering it now. The blue are those that plan to in the next few years, and then the purple are not offering, have no plans. So the question, of course, becomes, what does this mean? And how do you compare? So how do those numbers compare to 2012? And I think that what we really mean is to look at is the expectations in 2012 versus the realities of 2019. And not surprising, any of you who are in management positions know that your plans and your realities don't always follow the same schedule and don't necessarily always match. So, compare. So in 2012, these are 2012 numbers. What I did, the reason they're blue is I took the ones that are offering, combined that with the ones who said in 2012 they were planning to offer each of those services. So those two things, it's been 7 years, in the best case scenario, those two things should equal or be lower than what people are offering in 2019. If all the plans went the way we expected, we wouldn't have stopped offering services and we would offer what we said we were going to, right? Okay, so these are the 2012 numbers, and here are the 2019 numbers. There is one exception. Okay, providing reference services were right where we thought we should be. So those that planned to offer and offered reference service support around helping people find information about research data services, where you can locate data, where you can put your data, those kinds of things. That's right on, the same percent. Everything else is a lot lower. So our expectations or plans don't necessarily meet the reality. So the bottom one we didn't ask in 2012, but all of the others that have the two bars are what we should have seen in 2019 and what we really saw in 2019. So they're not exactly the same libraries that responded, but many of them are, and it is the same population that we reached in 2012. So it is the same 3,000. So it probably is pretty close. This was for informational services. The picture, as you can imagine, with technical services is even a bit more mismatch between planning and reality. And there isn't anyone that I can put the happy arrow and circle around. They are all lower than would be expected. So those who expected to provide technical support for a data repository, it would have been 42 if everybody did what they expected to do, and in reality it's just a quarter of these libraries are providing data repositories. And one of the reasons maybe they don't have to because they are collaborating with others, but we'll look at some of the other reasons they told us. So reality, expectations are kind of out of alignment here, in particular with the technical side. There isn't any in 2019 that's over about a quarter. Okay, so the question is, why didn't libraries meet their data services goal? Why is there this mismatch between what we would expect to see in 2019 and what we're really seeing? So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan to talk about those.
Okay, so to further examine this question, we gave respondents the opportunity to answer open-ended questions, and we asked them if they'd participate in follow-up interviews as well. So one of the open-ended questions we asked was, what have been the challenges to providing research data services? And the number one reason across all types of institutions that we saw was staffing. Now, staffing can mean something different based on the type of institution. So, for example, at doctoral and research institutions, we saw comments such as, we've built the program with existing staff, we could be doing a lot more based on campus need, creating new staff positions, and slow to hire dedicated staff. So they're experiencing, they want to hire dedicated people for these positions. They want to hire in a data librarian to help offer these services. However, at smaller institutions, such as master's, bachelor's, and associate colleges, we saw comments such as, no expertise among librarians, and many of our subject librarians have shown tempered enthusiasm about adding this to their plate. So this is a different type of staffing issue. They don't have the resources or the manpower to even begin offering these services, and their staff doesn't really have the expertise to offer the services. Beyond staffing, other types of barriers that we saw, funding, getting money to hire those data librarians or getting money for training the librarians that are already there. Infrastructure and technology, having an institutional repository that can support large data sets, or even having an institutional repository at all. Faculty awareness and faculty interest. If they do have research data services, how do they let their faculty know that they're being offered? And many of these institutions, their faculty aren't really interested in research data services, or they're not doing that type of research, so there's really no interest for it. And then also institutional support, getting that higher up buy-in so they can begin to offer these services. So after our survey, we asked respondents if they'd be willing to participate in a follow-up interview. And so far, between the research team, we've done about 20 plus interviews between a variety of institutions. So I think we've had about 14 doctoral research institutions ranging from R1 to R2 and R3, a few bachelor's and master's, one associate, and I think there's also one tribal as well. So during interviews, we asked participants about the barriers that prevent research data services at their institutions. Some of the comments we saw were, probably the more substantial barrier has been people who are in decision-making positions who think that because we're primarily a teaching institution, that it's not a priority. We recently conducted a faculty survey on research data services. There's a great need on campus, but most faculty do not consider the library as a resource for these services. I would say staffing is probably going to be the biggest barrier. So we saw the same issues carry over from the open ends into the interviews. Although despite all of these barriers and many librarians feeling that they're not supported in their pursuit for research data services, we saw that they are still hopeful, especially throughout the open ends and the interviews. Many do have goals regarding their next steps for research data services at their institutions. Librarians also believe that it's extremely important to the field, and they believe it's the library's role to implement and instruct research data services. So we asked respondents about their goals for the future of research data services, specifically asking, what's your library's next step in research data service management? So they were looking at ways to try to overcome those barriers that we saw earlier. So many want to begin offering a variety of services or begin just implementing research data services at their institution. Their next goal is to get that support from the higher ups so they can begin offering the services. Again, being able to have an institutional repository that can support large data sets. I also saw through my interviews that many don't even have an institutional repository, so that's their next step. getting that faculty awareness if they do offer these services, and doing faculty user surveys so they can know the types of services they want to offer their faculty. And training, offering more training if they do have librarians in these positions so they can offer a wider variety, and training for librarians who are just beginning the process of offering these services. Some specific goals we saw: distributing the work across multiple librarians and developing some written policies, and acknowledging that there is such an animal. So even though the need for research data services at smaller institutions is not as great, these librarians do recognize that research data services is the direction that academic libraries are going, and they want to be involved in that. So during interviews, we asked participants their overall thoughts on the roles of research data services in the library. And what we saw was that they believe the value comes from the library offering these services. So one person said, granting agencies like entrusting libraries with the safety of data, because that means an institutional commitment. It's not, dear NSF, I promise I'll put this on my network drive. And this is where the library can make itself feel valued again. So again, librarians believe that the value comes from their ability to offer these types of services. So now that we know a little bit more about the barriers they're facing, I'm going to pass it over to Bob, and he can talk about what libraries are doing to hire and train staff in research data services.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So I'm going to be speaking to a subset of the questions from our survey about how academic libraries are building capacity in research data services. And on this slide, I'll be presenting data from the 47% of the libraries who said they are involved in providing research data services. So 37% of those libraries indicated that a single individual is responsible, such as a data librarian. 24% indicated that a group, a committee, or a team is responsible. And interestingly, very few, 4%, indicated that a library department or unit is responsible. So we also thought it was interesting to note that 30% of the respondents said that responsibility for research data services plans and programs rested with some combination of individual, group, or committee and/or department and unit. So our survey didn't probe further on that, but we did get some insights about a couple of models as we talked to people in our interviews. So one model that we uncovered was of a data librarian at a R1 institution who was supported by several subject liaison librarians. And those liaison librarians act as the expert data curators for the disciplines that they're already supporting. In another case at an R1, a sole data librarian is supported by an internal advisory committee that's comprised of technologists, scholarly communication librarians, and liaisons. So we asked the library directors and deans to tell us how they develop their library's capacity to provide these services. To quote from our forthcoming white paper, the key factor in connecting researchers to services is for academic libraries to employ a trained data sciences librarian or specialist, or provide current librarians with research data services training and professional development opportunities. So of those libraries responding about these capacity issues, 47% indicated that they had reassigned existing staff, and 27% that they had hired staff specifically into positions to support data services. 19% indicated they were planning to hire, and 16% said they were planning to reassign staff. 30% indicated other as a tactic to develop capacity, and one of the common ones there was training existing staff. It's also worth noting that the research and doctoral institutions are more likely than all other types of institutions to have a dedicated data librarian. And that's in contrast with the 2012 survey, which didn't indicate that there was really a difference in by institution type if such a position existed. So, I think most of us know that most academic libraries are, or at least perceive themselves to be under-resourced, and expanding their portfolios can feel like one more thing, and particularly for liaison librarians who have to maintain currency in so many things like effective instruction, collection development, scholarly communications more broadly, digital scholarship, digital humanities, and so on. So 154 libraries responded to this question. Has your library provided opportunities for staff to develop skills related to research data services? And 42% responded yes. And so librarians need these tools and training and guidance to effectively communicate with their researchers about specific data questions. So we also asked the follow-up questions. Which opportunities have you provided? So about 31% provided support for their librarians to attend conferences or workshops. 20% supported their librarians taking courses about research data services. About 15% provided in-house workshops and presentations. And about 7% collaborated with some other academic program. I think there's broad support for things like webinars in particular, because those are frequently low or no cost. And we also heard that a lot of librarians getting involved with data resources are using non-library resources like lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning, as it's now been rebranded, to help them develop skills in specific tools. So like Open Refine, so you can take courses on specific tools like that, or GIS tools. So since 2012, there's been a lot of change and increasing numbers of venues and opportunities for librarians to learn about research data management skills. So the Earth Sciences Information Partnership, ESIP, and Data One have developed the Data Management Training Clearinghouse. And so that's a registry for online learning resources focusing on research data management. So that's one resource that brings together information about a lot of other resources. Adina's developed Mantra, a free online course for those who manage digital data. The Data One project itself has always had training scientists and librarians about research data management as one of its central goals, and has developed educational modules and best practice information that have been widely used in the academic library community. And the Belmont Forum also has a e-infrastructures and data management toolkit, which is, again, kind of a catalog of existing information, courses, and so on that are available in other places. So another couple of developments here are that the Association of College and Research Libraries developed the ACRL Research Data Management Roadshow, and this has been presented 14 times since 2016, and it's designed to be delivered on site for up to 100 participants, and the main target audience for this one-day event is liaison librarians. And finally, this is, many of you have heard of this, is just launched the Research Data Management Librarian Academy, a free online professional development program for librarians, information professionals, or other professionals who work in a research-intensive environment throughout the world. And in addition to training resources, there's also venues for data librarians and liaisons to engage with a broader research data management community. So one of the significant ones is RDAP, Research Data Access and Preservation Association. They have a well-attended annual meeting, and in the last couple of years, in the U.S. at least, there's been at least 3 regional spin-off groups who have separate meetings each year. There's the Data One community, formerly known as the Data One Users Group, and so that again is a venue for engaging with people from around the world about learning about research data or participating in how research data services are provided more from the repository and scientist side of the equation. There's the Research Data Alliance, which has a Libraries for Research Data interest group. That's also an international group. And finally, this is internal to the U.S. Geological Survey. They have a Community for Data Integration. So that's a government agency that's been very involved in research data management in recent years. So training is key because research data management is important for all types of institutions. And so I think there's a recognition among most libraries that libraries have been preserving information for centuries, and just because we're thinking of a new form of information in a different kind of container, it doesn't really matter. It fits with the mission of a library. And I think also interestingly is I think libraries are starting to recognize that there's a change in scope for information literacy provision on campuses, and that students, no matter what their discipline, they're likely to be getting jobs and careers in places where data is central. People want to understand the value of what an organization is doing. They want to look at data. They want to analyze it. They want to be able to visualize and communicate about these things so that adding to the portfolio of instruction to include visualization, GIS capabilities, and so on, that the students may not have access to in their own academic programs. And finally, this came up in one of our interviews. One research-intensive R1 institution talked about they offer a boot camp to graduate students in the summer, 2-day-long events, and they bring in experts from all around campus. They bring people who have attended the previous boot camps to talk about this. And one of the things they tried to do is share the kinds of setbacks that can happen in a research project if you aren't doing effective data management, which I thought was a very interesting approach. So again, watch for the white paper that will be coming out in December. And then we'll be happy to hear your questions and comments. And there's 2 microphones in the room, so if you could walk up to those and queue up, and we'll take them in order.
Hello. Oh, I'm Anthony Watkins, and as you'll see, I'm on the program, but I shouldn't have been there. It was a glitch. However, I am extremely interested in this work, which I know for some time. And I have a question, looking at it from a different point of view. Have you any idea how many researchers applying for grants have an insistence in the terms of the grant that they provide a data management plan? I know some do.
Don't know the numbers, but in the U.S., if they are applying for grants from the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and a variety of foundations, they do have to have a data management plan. And all of the federal agencies, they have to have a plan.
Yeah, good. I thought so.
Yeah.
I've been interviewing early career researchers for the last 3 years, especially including the U.S., and I thought there was some quite.
Yeah, in the U.S., it's a little different from the EU, for example, in that it doesn't have to be immediately open data, but it has to have a plan for how they're going to preserve their data. And yeah.
Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Sloan from Middle Tennessee State University, so I'm your neighbor in Murfreesboro. And I really appreciate this. I'm looking forward to this white paper. And I think it was about 18 months ago, there was a report called Shifting to Data Savvy. A couple of the authors I know were Chris Erdman and Bonnie Tierra. There were a couple others, I apologize, I'm forgetting them. But I think what I really took away and have appreciated since reading that is they define the challenges of shifting to data savvy in libraries in little bit two frames, the skills gap, but also the administrative or the leadership gap, and not getting support from library leadership in many different facets and levels. And you touched on that a little bit, and I sort of suspect, although I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, that even some of your difficulty in getting the administrators to respond might indicate some of their lack of focus or understanding or just competing priorities. So I just wonder what if there's a question in there somewhere in that thought, if you can share what you think that looks like and maybe what the future holds as far as our leadership, taking more leadership.
I think Bob and I could probably both, since he is an associate university librarian, so you give your perspective too. But I think part of it is in 2012, it was newer and kind of the shiny new thing, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. In 2019, the reality of difficulty has been as people try to do things, but also as other priorities have come up, so other new things. And so part of it is the library, this feeling, and those of you who are in libraries, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like, how do we set the priorities? And so we got from the open ends and the interviews, there's a lot of, we set the priorities based on institutional priorities and the priorities of our constituents. So your libraries are very, very much focused on what their students and faculty need. And if the students and faculty are not pushing forward or don't see the library, then then there's not the urgency to do that instead of other things. Where there is a real push for it still, though, is in those institutions where there are mandates and no one else on campus has really stepped up to do it, and so the libraries are doing it. It's interesting, we did the same survey a couple of years ago in Europe, and for Liber, and the European libraries, there was much more discussion of policies across the institutions and across the country. So the libraries there were much more involved in countrywide policy making, where we didn't see that so much, and I'm not exactly sure why. I think it's more because of our distributed kind of institutions here, but there was less of the policy making, but more of the research services offering. So, Bob, you wanna?
Yeah. So this brings a couple of stories I've heard to mind about folks outside the library. So, in one example is a provost who just felt that providing support for storage and preservation of research data in terms of academic credit for researchers and their quest for tenure, that shouldn't really count. What really counts is the paper and the analysis and all that. So there's a provost who just wasn't on board with really giving credit for data. And another story was of the top level research administrator, like a VP for research at a big university, who felt that this research data management and mandates and all that was kind of a passing fad, and that the mandates would be pulled back. And so on that campus, it was difficult to get the research office on board. The story I heard was that the lower level folks in that office were eager to, but they couldn't move forward because of the highest level person's reluctance.
Yeah. So as for the library to get involved, the administration, research office, faculty, and graduate students need to be aware of the issues, and then there also has to be an awareness of the sticks, the mandates, and why that's important and what could be the risk of that. But also there has to be the carrots in place that they will get credit in the academic reward system for doing this. So those two things are important to be in place.
Tara Cataldo, University of Florida. I'm wondering, in your own research data management for your projects, which of those services you value most or wish you have if you didn't have them?
Yeah. Yeah, so my own is, God, talk about frustration. So I do a lot of human subjects research, and so all of those of you, and thank you if anybody is here has responded, I know Florida, who's responded to our surveys, because I really, really appreciate it. It is very welcome. I know you get lots of things. We always say now the data will be shared. And we started doing that maybe 5 years ago or something. And our research office will not let us share data, earlier data. You know, I got an office full of floppy disks or whatever, you know, old data, because it's human subjects. So, you know, so there's problems with that. On the other end of sharing data, the problems come with when you have people who are dealing with instrumentation data, which it creates so much data that you can't possibly house it on your own institutional repository. So that, I work with people who have that issue. In that case, the library's role is to help them find another repository, not actually house it. But that's my data is little data, you know, in that sense. So those are two of the issues that I deal with, either the human subjects or the two. But what's really important to me is a library that I would love to have the library come and get the data and find out what's legal and help me with the metadata. You know, I know what metadata is, but a lot of my colleagues don't really. They do in the iSchool, but they don't in other places. So, you know, have the library take a role. Libraries have done this with institutional repositories sometimes, you know, have gone to the faculty and they start with the most productive faculty usually and say, we'll get your things into the institutional repository. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. But if somebody is there and saying, I'll help you, that's a labor-intensive thing, but it really, and once you get that idea, then the next time you're more likely to do it from the beginning. A researcher is more likely. So it's that jump start, in a sense. Oh, there's another thing, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to do it. I'll help you, and then I learn as I do. So I think the hands-on is really, really key.
Hi, I was lucky enough to take a research data management course in library school, and so I'm very excited to read your white paper, but I wanted to put in a plug for 3 things. First, for librarians who don't have an institutional repository, I encourage them to check out re3data.org, which is a directory of repositories that anyone can use. It doesn't matter what institution you're at. Second is Kristen Briney's book, Data Management for Researchers, which is a very good primer, and a Coursera course, which is free. It's called Research Data Management and Sharing by UNC Chapel Hill.
That's the ADINA. That's in partnership also with ADINA.
Okay.
We should have mentioned that. Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, Chapel Hill, yeah.
And that just started today. There's a
Yeah.
free offering that starts today.
Yeah. So Chapel Hill and ADINA and then the Simmons Research Data Management Library Academy, those are free. The RD is free as well. You can get continuing education credit for a fee, but the modules are free to access.
Yes. So, yeah, thanks for plugging those resources.
Birgit Schmidt from the University of Göttingen. I also wanted to mention other resources. I mean, you mentioned the RDA, Libraries for Research Data, but also the Carpentries community was not mentioned yet. Yeah. So we have the 10 things, fair data, jointly produced with them, and this is all material people can start with. And
I appreciate that, and I think a really good thread here is if you're in a library that's kind of not started yet or just beginning to, you don't have to do it alone. There are many, many communities and also tutorials and courses that really help you lead you through this. And also, research data management does not mean only creating a data repository. There are publicly available data repositories. In fact, most of my data is in Dryad data repository. Our library was going to have a data repository, and they found out it was more difficult and lower priority, you know, like a lot. And so that doesn't stop the library from helping getting data into repositories. So there are lots of services that can be offered and lots of help for it.
Yeah, and while we're giving shout-outs to other resources, I'm reminded of the Journal of eScience Librarianship, which is an open access journal that publishes a lot of the practical research in this area. So I'd recommend folks take a look at that as well. So I think we have time for one more, if anybody has one.
The last one.
Sure. It would, yeah, it would help. Thank you.
I wonder about your thoughts. I actually presented at a stopwatch a couple days ago about a workshop I do for grad students on data management and visualization. And I just wonder about your thoughts about training the next generation of researchers and, you know, kind of how libraries can move into that space and separately from just supporting researchers who are already, you know, out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to, in answer to your question, that's at my institution. That's something a small number of librarians who are pretty passionate about research data management are starting to talk about. Is we have a rubric in the catalog, and just as the library, my institution doesn't have an iSchool, so we're exploring just at the very beginning, to understand if it's feasible for the library to offer more courses. You know, in data, we do have a 1-credit course on data management on the books already, but expanding that to talk about these broader skills with working with data. So, you know, someone in a humanities degree probably isn't going to get courses on that, and they might not be able to get into courses in specific other programs on campus. So we want to explore that, see if that's actually feasible. Of course, it's one more thing, and can we afford to do it? Is there enough tuition revenue to allow us to support it without having to ask for an increase in budget and so on? There's a lot of questions to be answered.
Back that question, and then back to the question of what do I want as a researcher for the library to do, and that's something that libraries do very well, and that is come into my classes and teach a module about research data. You know, start that from the very beginning as part. You know, we have done that for years in libraries of the general how to use the materials, but having the research data part of it with examples from the subject areas that they're teaching. So I value that a lot, and I know many of you are doing that, but that's really helpful.
Okay, so I know we're at time, and it's also lunch time. So thank you very much for sticking with us late on Friday.